Okay, so we're going to be very informal today, and I've got a panel full of people who are both knowledgeable and loquacious. So we're going to go immediately into questions, as we promised you we would. I won't deviate from them until we decide to argue amongst ourselves, which we probably will. So, gentlemen, 5G, you represent various parts of the ecosystem from where you sit. What does it mean? What's the value? What's coming? And you don't have to answer all of them.
Do you want me to kick off? Or?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I'm Dean Bubley. I'm an industry analyst and consultant, and I advise on sort of everything from sort of the regulatory and spectrum aspects to market evolution. So, my core thoughts about 5G are that it's important, but perhaps getting a little bit overhyped in some areas. And I think there's one important element that often doesn't get brought out. Everyone talks about how transformative 5G is going to be, how it's going to impact enterprises, multiple other industries. But what nobody in the telecoms industry seems to realize is that the first industry that 5G is going to transform is the telecom industry itself. And what we're going to see in the 5G era is a whole set of new providers of mobile and wireless connectivity, whether they're wholesale plays, indoor wireless specialists, enterprises running their own private networks, hybrids of virtual and of MVNO and MNO, cable MSOs getting into the market. Yeah, and I think that we're going to see this interesting heterogeneity. For me, that's one of the interesting outcomes of 5G and the regulatory and government impacts that that's going to have as well.
John, how do you see things?
Yeah, so we represent American Tower, right? So we're one of the largest cell phone tower operators in the world. And from our perspective, I think 5G is just another evolution, right, of the ecosystem. And so what we expect to see, and we've started to see some of it in various markets, is, more spectrum deployed, low, mid, high band, additional increase in fiber deployments to increase connectivity, and then ultimately for us, additional deployments on some of our cell towers. But like our colleague just said, I think what's going to happen is you're seeing new entrants, new players come into the space, and it has an opportunity to not necessarily transform in the way that it's being used today, but the ecosystem is going to expand. You'll see different participants, new customers, new use cases. And for us, it's exciting. We're just kind of an enabler of it and looking forward to participate and help it become successful throughout the globe.
I think we represent a new entrant. So we've been working in the media and entertainment space for 18 years. And I think the promise of 5G represents, very simply, the notion of that last mile to where production happens. And I define production as the act of actually creating the content, where you have the actors, the humans, and the camera teams generating 1 to 5 terabytes of camera raw data on any given day. And we've gotten pretty adept at connecting productions to the internet over the last 4 years. And I know that one of our biggest pain points in terms of especially scripted television is connecting productions to the internet. And right now, at the early stages of working with 2 carriers, one in Asia and one in North America, it does really feel like we're at the early stages. But I think what we want to do is to be part of that process and to accommodate the pain points of production, which has never been connected to the internet, right? So scripted television is a little bit different than a live football game. But right now, as we recently learned, there's something north of $200 billion of spending to create scripted television. So we want to be a part of the process to resolve the pain points of production that's not being connected to the internet as we start learning what the various carriers and 5G services look and feel like between now and the next 2 to 3 years.
From my perspective, China is very actively promoting 5G right now. In last year, we have deployed more than 130K base station, 5G base stations in China, and sold more than 13 million mobile phones, 5G mobile phones in China. People in Asia tend to be very positive about new technology, and they want to try things new. From my research area, I think 5G gives us the opportunity to include IoT into this new new area, and also give the telecom operators a chance to collaborate with industry leaders in different sectors. But the challenge is the mindsets from my experience. When you work with people in different industry sectors, they actually treat telecom sector as a kind of a additional benefit or something supporting, play a supporting role in their own business. So I think currently, although everyone is talking about 5G, especially from different telecom and also industry sectors, but they are meaning different things. So it's not just about data rate or latency. It's mainly about business and mainly about their the killer application for different industry sectors. So I think 5G still has a long way to go. There's a joke in China saying, when 5G will become popular? The answer is that when 6G start to commercialize, then we got 5G popular. So, so that's a joke, but that gives us the hint that it's very difficult to work across domains and across different industry sectors.
So we've heard from Ramy that there's some really interesting things that can happen. Dr. Yang, you're talking about use cases being more important than the infrastructure per se. I think at some level we all agree the infrastructure really isn't that big a deal. I mean, it is long term, but short term, are we getting too hung up on this?
No, I disagree. I think infrastructure is going to be a real challenge, but not in the ways that people think. I think backhaul infrastructure and fiber in a lot of places is a challenge. I think that getting sites, not just in the normal locations, but perhaps dense metro areas where there's lots of permitting and rights of way and problems is challenging. And then especially, and one of my pet topics is indoors. And I think the indoors is really hard because we expect to have a public network service work on private property. And that brings into the equation all sorts of issues around ownership, jurisdiction, interconnection, especially if you're talking about edge compute as well. And if you and I are playing, I don't know, virtual reality game, but you're on mobile operator number 1 and I'm on mobile operator number 2, where do we interconnect? We can all talk about low latency, but unless there's a cross connect at a local level, and there's some sort of edge interconnect, that's not going to work either. You think about the future, talking about IoT use cases. If I've got a machine in a factory that could kill someone if it goes wrong, who is going to, never mind the ultra reliable, how do you deal with the liability, not the reliability? And so if you talk to an operator about this and say, well, if I use your 5G in my factory to connect my robot or my machine and it kills someone, will you be the person in court or will it be me? And whenever I ask that to an operator, they're going, no, it's you. So unless you're prepared to take the rap for people, you can't, if you like, provide guaranteed quality of service because the guarantee stops where the lawyers start.
This raises a sort of interesting jurisdictional issue. I mean, there have always been the wide area network and then LANs, which are private. One's public, one's private. Mobile sort of broke all those rules because it's supposed to work wherever you happen to be, which is on private premises. Dean, you're big on the idea that they're going to be private networks of all types. So that sort of leads me to think, okay, so what are the new revenue roles? What are the new organizational roles? I mean, who can win? Who loses in this area? And John, I know you've got some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, we hope everybody wins, right? And it's a big ecosystem. I think one of the points that Dean made earlier that's interesting to think about is there's a ton of evolution with the ecosystem and the virtualizations of some of these networks, but they all come back to the physical layer, right? And so the point about the physical points of presence that you need to enable that to take place, I think is important for folks to think about. We, as a tower owner and operator, an infrastructure asset owner and operator, we have a lot of those challenges with deploying new sites, right? The permitting, the environmental, the regulatory, the hurdles that we have to face. And most of our sites in the US, 41,000 are suburban and rural. When you think a lot of 5G, a lot of talk is going to happen in more dense urban areas first and then kind of expand out. But to think that to rip up streets and buildings to put in new infrastructure assets is going to be a challenge.
Ramy, we were talking earlier about sort of what it is that you do as a filmmaker. And the fact that in the past we've had electronic news gathering, and lots of people have made money pulling fiber to sports stadiums because there's a lot of video that needs to be pumped out of those locations. You have an idea about sort of ubiquitous, everywhere video production, and then how 5G supports that, and therefore there should be some opportunities. Why don't you explain that?
Well, ubiquitous in a fanciful kind of way, but more practically, we're competing with FedEx. We're competing with production assistants that take the drives that have all of the, what we call the treasure, everything that's acquired on set. Back in the day when that used to be film, that used to be treated with a certain level of urgency and reverence, because if that film got destroyed, all manner of mayhem would happen. So now it's files, and there's been kind of now when people enter the production industry, it's like, oh, it's just a drive, and I'm going to drive it from here to there. Well, we want more oversight on those files, and we want to connect productions. Specifically, our scope is scripted television, which has now become the center of media, so to speak, because there's more gravity in scripted television than just about any other part of media and entertainment. So we want to do something better than FedEx. We want to connect productions, and we think that our general preliminary approach is, of course, 5G is not going to give us end-to-end transport capability, but clearly, hopefully, in the early stages, we can wirelessly hop to the wire where we already are, and where we can cross-connect at places like One Wilshire, which is the ability, to do BGP routing and interact with 271 ISPs. We already have that capability, but I think a wireless hop makes a lot of sense in terms of a last mile pain point relief for productions that, remarkably, none of them are connected to the internet. And the last thing I'll note is, right now there are camera devices that can shoot 4K, 6K RAW that now are at a price point of $2,000 to $3,000. That was not the case 2 years ago. So think about the commoditization of big data imaging that will get into the hands of just normal people, not even professional productions, just someone who can afford a camera for $2,500 and can conveniently shoot 1 to 3 terabytes of data, even if it's their own independent production that's going on YouTube or Facebook Live. So we just want to get in front of that and apply our knowledge about the sensitivities and needs of production.
Now, Professor Yang, part of your research portfolio is fog computing, edge computing, IoT, and we've been sort of saying, well, how important is 5G really? And many people have questions about whether 5G by itself is actually all that useful. If you don't have edge computing, maybe the latency advantages are not realizable. What's your view on that?
Yes, I think in the research community, we believe that the real new technology for 5G, first is massive MIMO. The second one is slicing, so you can organize the application very flexibly. And the third one is edge computing, because you can handle the massive data generated from different devices locally. I think that's part of the reason that 5G is dealing with a lot of things. If you think about 2G, 3G, and 4G, actually the users are intelligent. We decide which picture, which film we want to upload to the network. So we can put all the intelligence in the cloud. So the network, by its role, is a transport system. But in 5G, if the devices, most of the devices are stupid, they do some operations according to your orders or the rules, then you have a kind of transparent network, and you put all the intelligence still in the cloud. It doesn't make sense.
I'm going to disagree with that.
Of course you will. That's why we have you here.
Whenever I speak to the chipset companies,
Yep.
they're focused on creating ever smarter devices that can work offline, autonomously, pre-process stuff in the camera, in the sensor, in the robot,
Yep.
and then use the connection and the cloud only where necessary. So I think
Right.
you're going to see this sort of tiering of compute from the sort of the sensor to the device it's in, to a gateway, to the edge of the network, to the middle of the network, to the hyperscale. And I think that the real value is going to be in the software that works out where on that continuum do I put the compute.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I want to say, because if we still keep the same network structure, that means we use the network as a transport system. It's not sufficient. We need to make use of the computing resource at different tiers of the network, and including the edge, the tower, the base station, and also in-device to handle the local data very quickly. So I think that's the only way to satisfy the requirements on latency in 5G, especially for intelligent transportation, smart manufacturing, and also this medicine kind of services. So I think edge computing and fog computing, cloud computing will play together in the future, especially in the 5G situation, because we have a huge amount of data developed on the edge or in the hands of the users or by devices. We cannot just upload everything to the cloud. We need to handle them or process them in the continuum from things to the cloud. So actually, I drew a picture to show the similarity between the future network and the current human society. Okay, so we have, for example, for any company, you have the boss, and you also have this kind of managers in the middle, and then you have workers in handling the daily business. You cannot give all the documents to the boss to sign. You have managers to handle the local requirements very efficiently and very quickly. So the strategic data will be handled by the cloud, but the timely response will be handled by the edge and also the fog in the network. That's my opinion.
So John, for you, the edge means cell tower in most cases, huh?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I mean, I think we're experimenting on what the edge is, and I think the edge is definitely, like 5G has gotten overblown in terms of the narrative. For us, it's a shift to decentralization, right? So the network is going to continue to expand. It's going to densify. The throughput and speeds at which data transacts and flows is going to increase. And so we're looking to expand that and enable that by additional kind of on-ramps, if you will, which for us are physical points of presence. And so if we can enable those and leverage our real estate and power and fiber and connectivity and security that exists at our towers throughout the world to help that ecosystem grow, that's kind of what we're trying to look at right now in American Tower, both domestically and internationally.
What's your sense of the best business case as you're, I mean, we're early days, but where do you put the real estate?
We've seen, we're very early from our perspective, and we've seen a bunch of different use cases, right? From, carriers and networks looking to increase the aggregation pops, right? For the centers where they want to aggregate fiber because they're continuing to deploy more fiber for small cells or for rural densification and bringing broadband to rural areas, down to, the media and content players that are looking to distribute their content more widely. And lastly, to enterprises that were also looking to say, hey, I want my data, my computing, my processing more distributed than centralized for multiple different reasons. So we're seeing kind of a big amalgamation right now. No clear early winners by any means, but again, we're in open dialogue. We're trying to position ourselves as a partner and a solution provider to help kind of foster and grow the ecosystem.
Now, of course, Ramy doesn't care where the edge is. He just wants to be able to use it seamlessly, right?
Yeah, I want to generate interest so that you look at us,
right,
and support us. And one thing that was just mentioned earlier, I think this is connected to what you guys were talking about. So in terms of the framework of our killer app, which is in development, we always assume for what's called an offline mode, or I start a transport, I have this payload. We already assume there's going to be some kind of interruption, irregardless of whether it's 5G or even a wire. So we already behave like that. We think that there'll be issues with this huge payload getting to its destination. And so we look into techniques and frameworks that will say, once you re-engage with the internet, that I will get every bit of data to its destination with a checksum that's readable by just normal non-technical people. And that's just an example of a simple, killer app idea, because we think that that will be very much the case with 5G. Once 5G is part of the transport process, is while I'm sleeping, when I wake up, my whole payload got to its destination, and there's my verification, my manifest, which makes me feel like I'm not going to get fired if I'm working on a production.
Yeah. Yeah, in China, there's a very interesting case. There's a collaboration between Alibaba and China Tower. China Tower have 2.9 million towers across China. So Alibaba signed an agreement with China Tower. They want to deploy this computing device on the tower, so they can provide kind of computing intensive services. For example, group gaming. So if you want to play games with your kids or a group of people in the neighborhood, the computing power in the base station is not sufficient. You need to borrow the actual computing power from the tower to enhance the experience of the users. So that's probably one of the early case about 5G application.
That's interesting.
For most of the people that attend this conference and that are in the room right now, their revenue models are intensely affected by how many locations need optical fiber and lots of capacity. And for some of the others, the issue is this edge computing and small cells may actually be a new revenue stream. And of course, whenever there's a new revenue stream out there, the issue is, well, who gets that? Is it me, or is it the new guys that are coming in? So Dean, you look a lot at new entrants.
Yes.
What are the possibilities out there?
Well, I think, let's take it separately. So where is going to need fiber? Absolutely, there are going to be more radio endpoints. They could be small cells, they could be remote radio heads using a disaggregated radio network. So there's this term front haul as well as back haul that you'll come across. And I think that there is going to be a requirement to get fiber out into sort of more capillary locations, onto lighting poles or street furniture, as well as the large towers and indoors. But then going back a bit, then what you're likely to see is there's two or three trends here. At one level, you've got the radio network is sending compute back up into the core of the network, or not quite the core, but the periphery of the network, rather than at each individual cell tower. You might have a centralized aggregation node for a block or several blocks in a city. And then you've got the core network is being distributed amongst multiple locations and data centers in a territory. So it might be for a country like the UK or Germany, it could be 10 or 20 locations. For the US, it could be 200 or more. And then the other question is, that's for the internal use of the carriers. And then the question is, if the carriers are building out the infrastructure for the sort of the new radio network and the new distributed core, can they also sell capacity to third parties, to enterprises, to developers, given they've got to do it anyway? And that then gets into this discussion about, are we talking tens, hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of medium-sized or local data centers? My personal hypothesis is we're going to see the fundamental physical quantum of edge compute is going to look like a 40-foot shipping container put down somewhere where you've got lots of fiber and lots of power, which could be a large tower site, but it could be the parking lot of an industrial location, or, if there's anyone from Amazon here, it could be inside a Whole Foods.
Well, you know what Amazon's doing now? They've already figured this out. They've got a sort of 6-rack unit that you drop onto an enterprise premises.
Oh, outpost.
So it's literally a edge computing center co-located inside the enterprise, and these nodes could be everywhere.
Yeah, no, and that in a way, that goes back to what I was saying before about liability, because it's physically there. So if I'm the industrial company, I haven't got to worry about the connectivity and some remote cloud. I know that my data is here, and so my lawyers put a tick in the box, and I know also that actually my latency now is microseconds, not milliseconds, if I need it.
And that also means a lot more fiber getting pulled to a lot more locations, by the way. This panel is actually a little bit unusual in that you've got three of us who sort of study stuff for a living, major end user, and one infrastructure supplier, which is fairly balanced. So as we get down to sort of within the last 10 minutes, what kinds of stuff do you believe telecom types ought to be worrying about, or what do you as an end user really want from all us folks who do that kind of stuff?
I mean, right now, we have a startup to address not just the potential of 5G, but anything that can connect us to the internet, whether it's OneWeb or any modality that solves our problem. And right now, production is happening on a worldwide basis at an unprecedented clip. I do foresee a day where I have a 5G-enabled phone, which is probably more likely in areas in China, where I have a killer app and I have a camera, and that could be the conduit to transport right from production to the destination. That's mind-blowing. That would have an absolutely profound impact on the efficiencies and the benefits that productions have out in the field. I mean, imagine we're one of the few industries that's utterly not connected to the internet. So some kind of scenario where even my phone is relevant, even though I might have variable transport ability, if you can still get my payload to its destination, that is 100% better than nothing, right? So right now we're approaching it from a software angle, but we also see the potential of hardware innovation, because there's all kinds of mechanisms in production. There's cameras, there's drives, there's various software applications. So to have a hardware apparatus that can harmonize the tools of production and takes what is imaged, from one port like HDMI to a data port, and sends it to its destination with a verification. Those are the types of things that are extremely exciting. And we're endeavoring to make a dent there by contributing our mind share in terms of the needs and sensitivities of what it's like to be in production, which is usually characterized by 16-hour days, a lot of stress, always being behind schedule. So clearly, whatever we do, we can't introduce any new complexity to that environment because they're already underwater. Right? So if you ever look at a television production, everyone is stressed out, right? They're always behind. So you can't introduce complexity to their table. They're already like, leave me alone. I don't want to try anything new. So it's that sensitivity that we want to address. Whatever it is that we do has to have ease of use. And that's not a technical thing, that's just more of a psychological challenge. We can't introduce complexity to them. Not that they're sensitive, they're just underwater.
So John, your company is at least investigating whether you can be a supplier of edge computing, real estate, and or the services. And of course, the first question all of us should have when we're pondering those sorts of things is, who else is in this business? And if it happens to be a name like Amazon, it's always scary. I mean, there are some people who simply say, don't be in any business Amazon wants to be in. As soon as they come in, you're toast, right?
Right.
But that's the sort of thing that you're actually going to be looking at. Like, can you make a business out of it? And if so, what parts of that business are going to spin off revenue for you and sort of mitigate that Amazon effect?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but to summarize, where we sit, and I think where we'll sit for a foreseeable future, is at that physical layer. And so, you know, we want to help enable Amazon to deploy what they're going to do and other new entrants, right? And folks like Ramy that are looking to expand the media and entertainment business. And I think the thing that people need to realize is that doesn't happen overnight, right? It takes a while. We touched upon it earlier, to site, to permit, to acquire, to get access, right-of-ways, permitting, zonings, regulatory. And so, yeah, I think there's some interesting strategic things that Amazon did with Whole Foods, right? Which some people think they were doing that to get into the grocery business. Some people think they were getting it into, right, kind of physical real estate locations in kind of high populous areas of the country. So for us, we don't want to go toe to toe with anybody, right? We want to partner and work and enable them to succeed. And so we're definitely going to follow up with Ramy and figure out how we can leverage our infrastructure that exists today to help him out, and any other customer and enterprise that wants to do that, but are also committed to exploring what it's going to take to continue that momentum of infrastructure deployed. And that's, you know, we'll probably get around to it when people start talking about 6G and 7G, right? It's, you know, 4G is still the main network used in the US at least, right? And so there's been a lot of time and money and effort that went into that. And now we're embarking on, you know, the next evolution, and soon after that we'll be at the next evolution. So it's more of a marathon than anything.
So you wanted to say something? Yeah.
No. Well, okay. So I think this is really interesting because we're talking about the content creation and, I guess, broadcast and media industry. One of the challenges for the telecoms providers and also implicitly the infrastructure owners is there is going to be 10 or 100 industries and verticals, all with very, very different requirements. We just said we want to have it in ease of use, and you know, how do we create products for that? But if we had someone here who worked in the mining industry or the car manufacturing industry or gaming, or I've just been asked to speak at a 5G in banking conference, or 1,000 other sectors, everyone's going to have very different needs. And that's very different to today's 4G world, where the bulk of what we do is people wanting broadband for smartphones, whether, you know, for consumer use mostly. And yes, we've got different, you know, categories of consumers, but it's like millions, tens of millions of people in a category. And I think that what's going to happen as we go towards 5G, partly because of IoT, but also partly because of the problems of indoor coverage or location, or the mix of speed and latency and security and ownership, that the operators and the service providers and the infrastructure owners are going to have to think whether they want to be narrow generalists or whether they want to focus on certain areas. And frankly, you know, if you really want to go deep on a particular area, you probably have to choose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at most. Maybe if you're AT&T or China Mobile or perhaps Vodafone, you can do more. But the issue is that not everyone can do everything. And then the question is, beyond those bounds, do you just try and fake it, or do you try to work with partners who pick up the slack, IT systems integrators, industrial systems companies, I don't know, Honeywell or GE or Airbus or ABB and Siemens and companies for industrial? And do you have the ability to do that partnering? And then related to that is, do you have the right skilled people? And I think that this is an interesting comparison with, say, the Wi-Fi industry has hundreds of thousands of people can install pretty decent Wi-Fi. They've got a piece of paper with a certification. The number of people who have got certified, particularly millimeter wave, 5G, network slicing for enterprise verticals, credentials, we could fit in this room, probably in a corner of this room. Yeah, and the question is, how do you expand that number to satisfy this opportunity? Because otherwise we can come up with all sorts of great ideas, but there's no one to deliver it.
And the bad news is, whether you go horizontal or vertical, it's still going to be difficult. I mean, Vodafone, KDDI, Verizon have already partnered with Amazon to supply edge computing facilities. And of course, the computing as a service is supplied by Amazon, AWS. The colo is supplied by the telcos, and I'm thinking, okay, where's the value here? Now, it's good to have the colo revenue, don't get me wrong, and it's also not the only thing those companies will attempt. But already you sort of see that the higher value application layer stuff is kind of not being sucked out. It's just not there. I mean, we'll do some colo, which is nice. I'm all for that. But a lot of the higher order stuff is, I think, going to be really difficult. So gentlemen, we've got 25 seconds left. No time for questions, unfortunately, and also we can't see very well with these lights in our eyes. So thank you very much, gentlemen, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.